Hi, this is the city of Southport, and we are here with Liz Fuller, who is the Vice President of the Southport Historical Society. And today we have a very special event here at Fort Johnston on the Garrison Lawn that's getting ready to launch in just a few moments, but we thought we'd catch Liz and get a few words from her on the event and what's happening today. Liz, can you tell us about it?
Yes, Lisa, it's really an exciting event because this year is the 100th anniversary of the Wilmington Cape Fear Pilots Association. And so the Southport Historical Society wanted to help commemorate that event, and so we thought the best way to do that would be to have the monument that's in the old burying ground for the lost pilots of Smithville. We had it cleaned and preserved for the future. And so today we're going to be talking about who the lost pilots were and what happened to them back in the 1870s and our connection to them. And then we're going to be celebrating with the past and present pilots. And at the end of the ceremony, we're going to walk over to the burying ground, and the pilots are going to lay a wreath on the monument. And some of our special guests here today, we have some of the descendants of those lost pilots who unfortunately lost their lives back in the 1870s, but their great-grandchildren are here today to help remember them.
That's wonderful, Liz. What a great event, and what a lovely day for the event. We're looking forward to hearing the presentation, and so we're going to let you go. I know you've got some things to do before you start, and then we are just going to go get ourselves set up and wait for y'all to begin.
Great. Everybody's welcome, so if you're near the Garrison, come on down. It's going to be at 4 o'clock and probably about 5-ish over at the burying ground, so please come join us.
Thank you so much, Liz.
Also, I want to take a moment to join me in silencing your phones. Hello, good afternoon. I'm Bob Surridge, President of the Southport Historical Society, and we're really pleased that you can join us today. The year 2021 marks the 100th anniversary of the Wilmington Cape Fear Pilots Association. The Historical Society thought that an appropriate way to commemorate the anniversary would be to professionally clean and preserve the monument to the 10 Smithville pilots who lost their lives in the 1970s, and also to host a ceremony of remembrance for those brave men. So today is both a celebration of the Pilots Association and all they have contributed to Southport, and an opportunity to remember the earlier pilots who lost their lives at sea. Move the program on. What I'd like to do is introduce Southport Historical Society board member Mary Ellen Watts-Poole, who will be your master of ceremonies for today's event. Mary Ellen?
Thank you, Bob. Before we start our program, I'd like to talk about the Southport Historical Society and the North Carolina Maritime Museum at Southport. The Society is a non-profit organization, and we rely on donations and volunteerism to keep our history alive. Please consider joining in. If you haven't had a chance before our program, please check out our commemorative bricks that are in the walkway over here and along the side of this walkway. And perhaps honor your family with the brick, as so many of you already have. If our program today has piqued your interest to learn more about the pilots, purchase the book Masters of the Seas, Tales of the Cape Fear Pilots Who Ran the Union Blockade by Southport native son Jim McNeil. Also consider purchasing the Commemoration To begin our program, I would like to call the color guard of Scout Troops 239 and 1776 under the leadership of George Gray and Eric Hedlund. They will present the colors and lead us with the pledge of allegiance.
Color guard attention. Color guard forward march. Color guard halt. Color guard cross the colors.
The flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Color guard post the flag of the United States of America. Color guard return to rank. Color guard about face. Color guard retreat.
I would like to introduce Thomas J. Wilson. I want to add that it is very fitting for him to bless us with a prayer today, as he is the great-grandson of pilot Thomas Washington Brinkman, an 1872 lost pilot.
Heavenly Father, creator of the sea, bless us as we assemble to this most solemn remembrance. We give thanks to all your servants who go to sea and ship, and those who have paid the supreme sacrifice by giving up their lives in service of their nation. The passing of these many years has not diminished our love and gratitude for the thousands who went to sea and never returned, and especially for these men who have gone on to meet more homes and who are loving. So Father, grant the families who are lost at sea peace and comfort and the glorious service to their fellow men and women, and in the knowledge of their saving you as Lord, and our life and protection.
Mayor of the city.
Sounds like my opponent.
It's grateful to be here today. It's wonderful to be here today and see so many familiar faces, and to be able to welcome you on behalf of the city. We gather to celebrate the Wilmington Cape Fear Pilots Association 100th anniversary and to remember lost pilots of Smithville. As mayor on behalf of the city of Southport, it is an honor for me to be here. And I want to thank Mary Ellen for asking me to join you today. And I want to congratulate the Pilots Association and all the pilots that are here today. on their official centennial anniversary, and I want to thank the Southport Historical Society for sponsoring this special occasion. Southport's history and heritage is important to me and to our citizens. The river pilots were some of the first settlers of Smithville, and their courage and their knowledge of the Cape Fear River was unparalleled. As mayor, I'm dedicated to working with the Historical Society and the NC Maritime Museum and other organizations in preserving our history, in particular the history of our river pilots, whose tradition continues over the centuries of time. We celebrate these 100 years, and we remember the lost pilots of Smithville as we bring their story and their spirit to life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Bob, I need you to no, that's okay. I thought it was going to be okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I want to begin our program to remember the lost pilots of Smithville. I would like to recognize the honored guests who are descendants and families of the lost pilots of Smithville. Would you please stand? We thank you for being with us today. The Pilots Monument was erected in 1879 by the citizens of Smithville, as Southport was known until 1887. The townspeople were mourning the deaths of 10 pilots who had been lost at sea. The men were lost in 2 separate storms, occurring 5 years apart, in 1872 and 1877. The first tragedy took the lives of 5 pilots: Thomas W. Brindle, 34, and Joseph W. Benson, 48, who had been blockade runners during the Civil War, as well as John D. Trout, 24, James R. Sellers, 21, and Robert St. George, 22. Accompanying the pilots was Bensel's 16-year-old son, Joseph Bensel Jr., who was also lost. The second tragedy occurred 5 years later, when the Mary Case Front went down in a storm that was described as one of the fiercest storms that ever visited the coast of North Carolina. It lasted 3 full days. When it was over, the pilots and the crew of the Front were all lost. Thomas B. Grissom, 39, Robert S. Walker, 32, Christopher C. Penner, 25, Charles Dozier Jr., 26, and Lawrence Gillespie, 23. Funds to erect the monument were raised by donations and benefits held in Smithville. In fact, those entertainment and music that people enjoyed, they were held right here on the garrison lawn where you sit today. Colonel Pennington was the commander of Fort Johnston, and he held those several nights of entertainment to raise those funds. And this is what his quote that we found in the original document, the news report of the event. He raised these funds so that, quote, those who live after us may find the virtues and gallant deeds of their ancestors recorded on the imperishable stone. Please enjoy the picture in front of us, and you will see that the monument has been cleaned and is quite beautiful. The monument was dedicated in a ceremony in May of 1879, held at the Smithville Burying Ground, and attended by many of the citizens of Smithville. Dignitaries from Wilmington, including the harbor master and the commissioners of navigation, came to attend. They were met by the committee of pilots in Smithville, where flags were being flown at half-mast in honor of the fallen men. The monument was dedicated with prayers, hymns, speeches, and songs. It was estimated that it was the largest assemblage ever congregated in Smithville. At the dedication of the monument in 1879, one of the songs that was sung was "Peace, Be Still." I present to you Miss Cindy Sellers, soloist, and a long-standing society member, to perform this same song for us today. Miss Sellers is the music director and organist for the Village Chapel of Bald Head Island. Thank you, Mary Ellen. Peace Be Still, written in 1874, and well known to sailors for generations, dramatizes the passage from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. Jesus and the disciples are crossing the Sea of Galilee when a terrible storm comes up. The men, fearing they will drown, wake Jesus, who was sleeping in the stern, and beg him to save them. The verse is the pleading voice of the disciples. The chorus is the voice of Jesus as he calms the men and the sea. Master, the tempest is raging, the billows are tossing high, the sky is o'ershadowed with blackness, no shelter or help is nigh. Carest thou not that we perish? How canst thou lie asleep, when each moment so madly is threatening a grave in the angry deep? The winds and the waves shall obey my will. Peace, be still. Whether the wrath of the storm-tossed sea, or demons or men or whatever it be, no water can swallow the ship where lies the master of ocean and earth and skies. They all shall sweetly obey my will. Peace, be still. Peace, be still. They all shall sweetly obey my will. Peace, peace, be still. Master, the terror is over, the elements sweetly rest. Earth's sun in the calm lake is mirrored, and heaven's within my breast. Linger, O blessed Redeemer, leave me alone no more, and with joy I shall make the blessed harbor and rest on that blissful shore. The winds and the waves shall obey my will. Peace, be still. Whether the wrath of the storm-tossed sea, or demons or men or whatever it be, no water can swallow the ship where lies the master of ocean and earth and skies. They all shall sweetly obey my will. Peace, be still. Peace, be still. They all shall sweetly obey my will. Peace, 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 Cindy's lovely song closes our remembrance to the lost pilots of Smithville. Please share with me in a moment of silence to honor these brave men. We have now completed our solemn and reverent part of the program. Now let us switch to a celebration of the 100th anniversary of the Wilmington Cape Fear Pilots Association. Now, I would like to recognize, please stand up, active river pilots. Please stand up. And I would like everybody to hold your applause until I ask some other folks to stand up too. Thank you. I ask the retired river pilots to stand. The widows of the river pilots. And the families who have supported these folks. Please stand. Thank you, and you may be seated. We are celebrating today. And anytime the Southport Historical Society has an event, gets together, or just sporadically meets one another, or anyone else, we talk about history. And we try to give somebody a history lesson. Now, here is my history lesson for you today. It's about the color magenta. Now you ask me, what does magenta have to do with history? And what does magenta have to do with river pilots? Many of you are familiar with Bill Reeves' book, The Chronology of Southport, which is Smithville. Debbie Malachek, a member of the society and an excellent researcher, led me to this chronology for 1902. An article was written in a magazine about pilots, the heroes of the rivers. The pilots, excuse me, I need to quit listening to Jimmy Buffett music. The pilots were the dandies of the river towns. They wore fine clothing, and every boy hoped someday to become a river pilot. During this period of time, men wore dress gloves. It was 1902. They wore them as a fashion accessory and also a necessity. It was said that the pilots were seen fitting their fingers into their magenta kid gloves. They wore magenta kid gloves. I actually found this reference in the original publication entitled Everybody's Magazine in January of 1902 edition. In this magazine, I found this reference that magenta was the pilot's color in gloves, and it was his badge of his calling. In talking to a retired river pilot and asking him why is magenta so important to a river pilot, I was given a lesson in navigation. River pilots use nautical charts to navigate the waters. Small objects such as buoys and markers are shown in a magenta color on these nautical charts. Because charts are used at night under red light to keep from impairing their night vision, the color magenta shows up best at night and in the daytime. Buoys and dayboards that are actually red are indicated in magenta. Now I have show and tell. I want to show you my scarf that I have on today. If you can see it, it is overlaid by a nautical chart. And if you can see it closely, it has little magenta dots on it. And those magenta dots are actually, this is a real overlay of a chart. The magenta, can everybody see the colors? That's the buoys and the date ribbon. Now, as we all know, we are never certain about all historical notes and writings, and we often make assumptions and analogies. It is my thought that this is why the river pilots of yore wore magenta gloves. And today, I wear my magenta gloves in honoring these brave men of the river. It is now my privilege and honor to introduce our guest speaker for today's program, Captain Tommy Brindle, Senior River Pilot with the Wilmington Cape Fear Pilots Association. Before I ask Tommy to come to the podium, I must add that he has been very instrumental in keeping the history alive of the Wilmington Cape Fear Pilots Association. I also have to say that Tommy is a humble and modest man, but I must share with you today that he has a rich heritage. Although the old ways were ruled by nepotism, because of new regulations over time, today's pilots have no family members. However, Captain Brindle is, at least, as there is documentation, a fifth-generation pilot, beginning with James S. Newton, Walker Newton, Margie Newton, Richard Brindle, and now I present to you Captain Tommy Brindle.
On behalf of the Wilmington Cape Fear Pilots Association, my partners and I would like to extend our deepest appreciation and gratitude for the sacrifices that the Southport Historical Society has made for this event. We're most humbled by the fact that they were aware of this 100-year celebration and the anniversary being this year. They were aware of it, they initiated, called us, and put on this great celebration. We really thank you so much. So we know that pilots have been here in this area since our beginnings, and that's over 300 years ago, a long time. Thankfully, when the Historical Society came to me and asked me if I would speak, I'm thinking 300 years, you know. And thankfully, they just asked me to speak on the most recent 100 years of piloting. And by the way, they asked me, told me I needed to do it in 5 minutes or less. So we have just remembered tragic events that took place during the old ways of river piloting. And I'm so thankful that I didn't have to pilot during that time. And I'm sure my partners feel the same way. But sometimes knowing the past is a great way to understand the present. So try to visualize with me, if you will, as we hop back and forth between now and then. Back then, there were as many as 65 pilots in direct competition for one ship. Who's going to get there first? That was all that was on their minds. Today, there are only 7 pilots, and we get to take turns, just like we were taught in kindergarten. Pilot boats of those days left the dock with enough pilots and provisions to patrol 50, 70, even 100 miles from here in hopes of finding a customer. Today, usually one pilot leaves the dock only 1 hour early for the 10-mile trip to meet the scheduled arrival at the Cape Fear Seabuoy. Those older boats, full of pilots, had no choice but to go in adverse weather. Today, we're afforded the opportunity to make much safer decisions without fear of losing a customer. Guns. Can you imagine that men of those days took guns to intimidate the competition? Thankfully, today, we only have to battle the weather. We take much less intimidating equipment, like a life vest, navigation computer, maybe a coffee mug or a pilot hat to welcome our customer. Not only did they battle one another at sea, but they brought the battle to shore as well. There was at least one account back then when a dispute among pilots was settled with a tar and feathering. I'm a little ashamed to say that from an 1842 newspaper reporting of the event, my great-great-grandfather was the first to be named of 13 participants and was one of 4 who received jail time. It was over, from what I read, a strike. The pilots were striking for better pilotage rates or tariffs. And one of the pilots was known to say, if anybody breaks this strike line, he should be tarred and feathered. But that very pilot was the one that went and brought a ship in and broke the strike. Today, members of our association are a little more civil. Our tightly governed association has formal business meetings where yays and nays rule, mostly. And there's a navigation commission supporting if needed. In the old days, pilots needed a second skill or trade as there were no guarantees of income. Today, a backup skill is not necessary. The old pilot boats were primarily crewed by pilots taking pilots on and off of ships. The risk-reward simply didn't add up for unlicensed crew members. Fortunately, with today's conditions, the Pilots Association is able to employ multiple unlicensed crew members and dispatchers. In fact, these employees have equaled or outnumbered licensed pilots since the 1960s. We are very thankful to have them. So what brought all of these much safer and better conditions for river pilots 100 years ago? In 1921, the General Assembly of North Carolina took a bold step forward in its governance of river piloting. They reduced the number of licenses and passed laws requiring the remaining licensed pilots to become a mandatory member of the new Wilmington Cape Fear Pilots Association. These laws have stood the test of time and had great results. We thank God that 0 deaths and only a few broken bones, sprains, bumps, and bruises have happened in these 100 years. However, this would not have been possible without our North Carolina legislators. They enacted this new pilotage system in 1921, and they have maintained and updated it to this time. My partners and I feel that if anyone is to be honored here today, we believe that the true honor goes to these lawmakers. The same honor goes to the navigation commissioners who must implement those laws. I'd like to ask any former or present legislators that are here and former navigation commissioners or families that are, and current navigation commissioners or families that are representing any of these folks, would you please stand and be honored?
Thank you very much, Tommy. It has been a pleasure to spend time with you and talk to you in making this program possible today, and we appreciate it more than you will ever know. Thank you. I now call our Southport Historical Society President, Bob Surridge, for presentations.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Reference to history and the fact that amateur historians like myself, we like to talk about history. And the topic has been opened up already because there's been mention of Bill Reeves and his chronology of Southport. Bill Reeves was a charter member of the Southport Historical Society, and he published a 5-volume, 1,200-page chronology of Southport. In those 1,200 pages, there are over 17,000 entries. Seems like that would be a work of a lifetime for anyone. And I can't tell you how much as an amateur historian we appreciate the work that Bill Reeves did. As you might expect, hundreds of those entries are about Cape Fear pilots. One of the earliest entries is dated January 6, 1776, when the Wilmington Committee of Safety ordered that river pilots be taken into protective custody, an order that clearly indicates the historical importance of the Cape Fear pilots and the respect and the admiration we afford to these dedicated public servants. So today, to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Cape Fear Pilots Association, the Historical Society would like to present the association with copies of all 5 volumes of the chronology of Southport. Captain Brindle, would you? Fortunate today that with us today is Debbie Malachek, who is the granddaughter of the last civilian keeper of the Cape Fear River Lights. Debbie's grandfather, Franto Malachek II, joined the U.S. Lighthouse Service at the Charleston headquarters for the 6th District in 1923. At that time, the district ran from New River Inlet, North Carolina, down through South Carolina and Georgia coast to Hillsborough Inlet. During Keeper Malachek's 27-year career, he served at nearly every light station and river in that district. His last station, however, was here at the garrison. Keeper Malachek, his wife Lila, and their 3 children, including Debbie's father, Franto III, were the only lighthouse family to live at the garrison. Prior to Keeper Malachek's retirement in 1951, the family was very involved in the Southport community during the 14 years of service here. Debbie herself took a sabbatical from her practice as a trial attorney in 2016 to write stories of the lower Cape Fear region. In conjunction with the Southport Historical Society, Debbie helped develop an exhibit of her family's life that you can visit here in the Garrison. Her latest article, Serving Through Time, is a tribute to the Wilmington Cape Fear Pilots Association for its 100th anniversary and the pilots' efforts to save 3 adventurous boys during World War II. It really is it's a great story. And I'd like to ask Debbie to come up and share some thoughts with us, please.
In 1944, the Southport Pilot ran a short story on its front page. The article described the horrified faces of people who heard the screams of 3 boys on the river. The boys clung to their sailboat that had overturned. As they were pulled towards the Atlantic Ocean by the strong current, the pilots and Coast Guard went into action. Assisting them was their reliable boat, the R.R. Stone. The 3 teenagers the pilots would attempt to save that day were Lou Newton, Bobby Brown, and Franto Malachek III, my father. That short 1944 article blossomed into my story about the pilot's 100th anniversary. When I say it blossomed, the 1944 story was 100 words. 5 characters or people were in the story. With the help of my good friend, Tommy Brindle, our wonderful story, Serving Through Time, is about 9,000 words. 90 of Tommy's relatives and friends are named. On behalf of the Southport Historical Society, I present Tommy with gratitude a bound copy of Serving Through Time. Mayor Hayden, since returning to Southport about 11 years ago, I have made many friends. They told me stories of their families, and they patiently listened as I talked and talked about mine. For the past 2 years, when I have attended Southport events, I have seen you supporting your community with great joy. On behalf of my mother, Rachel, and our family, we thank you and the city for your efforts in advancing and protecting Southport's historic heritage. On behalf of the Southport Historical Society, we present to you a bound copy of Serving Through Time. Thank you.
I'm glad to get back to this microphone where it's still lower. I often say that Debbie and myself and Liz are history triplets. So thank you for this lower microphone, Debbie. Before we retire the colors, which will end our program here at the Garrison, I invite everyone to the old Smithville burying ground in approximately 15 minutes, where Cindy Sellers will sing the hymn, Eternal Father, Strong to Serve. During this time, Captain Brindle, Senior Pilot, and Daniel Dixon, Senior Boat Operator, will lay the wreath on the monument to the lost pilots of Smithville. I turn our program over to the Scout Troops Color Guard to retire the colors.
Color guard, attention. Color guard, forward march. Color guard, halt. Color Color guard, about face. Color guard, retreat.
In 15 minutes, we will meet you at the old Smithville Burying Ground.